Chapter 19. The Babies Grow Up. Bring on the Vita Wonk, said Mr. Wonka. We'll soon fix these two babies. And Oompa Loompa ran forward with a small bottle and a couple of silver teaspoons. Now just 1 minute, snapped Grandma Georgina. What sort of devilish stumpery are you up to now? It's all right, Grandma, said Charlie. I promise you it's all right. Vita Wonk does the opposite to Vita Wonk. I mean, Wonka Vit. It makes you older. That's what we gave you when you were minus. It saved you. You gave me too much, snapped the old woman. We had to, Grandma. And now you want to do the same thing to Grandpa George. Of course we don't, said Charlie. I finished up 358 years old, she went on. What's to stop you making another little mistake and giving him 50 times more than you gave me? Then I suddenly have a 20,000-year-old caveman in bed beside me. Imagine that. And him with a big knobby cub in one hand and dragging me around by my hair with the other. Well, thank you. Grandma, Charlie said patiently. With you, we had to use the spray because you were a minus. You were a ghost. But Mr. Wonka can... Don't talk to me about that man, she cried. He's batty as a bullfrog. No, Grandma, he is not. And here, he can measure it out exactly right, drop by drop, and feed it into their mouths. That's true, isn't it, Mr. Wonka? Charlie, said Mr. Wonka, I can see that the factory is going to be in good hands when I retire. You learn very fast. I am so pleased I chose you, my dear boy, so very pleased. Now then, what's the verdict? Do we leave them as babies or do we grow them up with Vita Wonk? You go ahead, Mr. Wonka, said Grandpa Joe. I'd like you to grow my Josie up so she's just the same as before, 80 years old. Thank you, sir, said Mr. Wonka. I appreciate the confidence you place in me. But what about the other one, Grandpa George? Oh, all right then, said Grandma Georgina. But he ends up a caveman. I don't want him in this bed anymore. That's settled then, said Mr. Wonka. Come along, Charlie. We'll do them together. You hold one spoon and I'll hold the other. I shall measure out 4 drops and 4 drops only into each spoon and we'll wake them up and pop into their mouths. Which one shall I do, Mr. Wonka? You do Grandma Josephine, the tiny one. I'll do Grandpa George, the 1-year-old. Here's your spoon. Charlie took the spoon and held it out. Mr. Wonka opened the bottle and dripped 4 drops of oily black liquid into Charlie's spoon, and he did the same to his own. He handed the bottle back to the Oompa Loompa. Shouldn't someone hold the babies while you give it? Said Grandpa Joe. I'll hold Grandma Josephine. Are you mad? Said Mr. Wonka. Don't you realize that Vita Wonk acts instantly? It's not 1 year second like Wonka beat. Vita Wonk is as quick as lightning. The moment the medicine is swallowed, ping, and it all happens. The getting bigger and the growing older and everything else all happens in 1 second. So don't you see, my dear sir, he said to Grandpa Joe, that one moment you'd be holding a tiny baby in your arms, and just 1 second later you find yourself staggering about with an 80-year-old woman and it'll drop her like a ton of bricks on the floor. I see what you mean, said Grandpa Joe. All set, Charlie? All set, Mr. Wonka. Charlie moved around the bed to where the tiny sleeping baby lay. He placed one hand behind her head and lifted it. The baby awoke and started yelling. Mr. Wonka was on the other side of the bed doing the same to 1-year-old George. Both together now, Charlie, said Mr. Wonka. Ready, steady, go. Pop it in. Charlie pushed his spoon into the open mouth of the baby and tipped the drops down her throat. Make sure she swallows it, cried Mr. Wonka. It won't work until it gets into their tummies. It is difficult to explain what happened next, and whatever it was, it only lasted for 1 second. A second is about as long as it takes you to say aloud and quickly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is how long it took, but Charlie watched it closely, for a tiny baby to grow and swell and wrinkle into the 80-year-old Grandma Josephine. It was a frightening thing to see. It was an explosion. And tiny baby son exploded into an old woman, and Charlie all at once found himself staring straight into the well-known and much-loved wrinkly old face of his Grandma Josephine. "Hello, my darling," she said. "Where have you come from?" "Josie," said Grandpa Joe, rushing forward. "How marvelous! You're back." "I know I've been away," she said. Grandpa George had also made a successful comeback. "You are much better looking as a baby," Grandma Georgina said to him. "I had grown up, George, for one reason." "What's that?" said Grandpa George. "You won't wet the bed anymore." Moving on to chapter 20. How to get someone out of bed. "I am sure," said Mr. Wonka, addressing Grandpa George, Grandma Georgina, and Grandma Josephine. "I'm quite sure the three of you, after all that, will now want to jump out of bed and lend a hand in running the chocolate factory." "Who, us?" said Grandma Josephine. "Yes, you," said Mr. Wonka. "Are you crazy?" said Grandma Georgina. "I'm staying right here where I am in this nice comfortable bed." "Thank you very much." "Me too," said Grandpa George. At that moment, there was a sudden commotion among the Oompa Loompas at the far end of the chocolate room. There was a buzz of excited chatter and a lot of running about and waving of arms. And out of all this, a single Oompa Loompa emerged and came rushing toward Mr. Wonka, carrying a huge envelope in his hands. He came up close to Mr. Wonka. He started whispering. Mr. Wonka bent down low to listen. "Outside the factory gates?" cried Mr. Wonka. "Men? What sort of men?" "Yes, but do they look dangerous? Are they acting dangerously?" "And a what?" "A helicopter? And these men came out of it? They gave you this?" Mr. Wonka grabbed the huge envelope and quickly slit it open and pulled out the folded letter inside. There was absolute silence as he skimmed swiftly over what was written on the paper. Nobody moved. Charlie began to feel cold. He knew something dreadful was going to happen. There was a very definite smell of danger in the air. The man outside the gates, the helicopter, the nervousness of the Oompa Loompas. He was watching Mr. Wonka's face, searching for a clue, for some change in expression that would tell him how bad the news was. "Great whistling wine doodles!" cried Mr. Wonka, leaping so high in the air that when he landed on his legs gave way and he crashed on his backside. "Snorting snowslangers!" he yelled, picking himself up and waving the letter about as though he was swatting mosquitoes. "Listen to this, all of you! You just listen to this!" He began to read out loud. "The White House, Washington, D.C. To Mr. Willy Wonka. Sir, today the entire nation, indeed the whole world, is rejoicing at the safe return of our transport capsule from space with 136 souls on board. Had it not been for the help they received from an unknown spaceship, these 136 people would never have come back. It has been reported to me that the courage shown by the 8 astronauts aboard this unknown spaceship was extraordinary. Our radar stations, by tracking this spaceship on its return to Earth, have discovered that it splashed down into a place known as Wonka's Chocolate Factory. That, sir, is why this letter is being delivered to you. I wish now to show the gratitude of the nation by inviting all 8 of those incredibly brave astronauts to come and stay in the White House for a few days as my honored guests. I am arranging a special celebration party in the Blue Room this evening, at which I myself will pin medals for bravery upon all 8 of these gallant flyers. The most important persons in the land will be present at this gathering to salute the heroes whose dazzling deeds will be written forever in the history of our nation. Among these attending will be my Vice President, Miss Elevra Tibbs, all the members of the Cabinet, the chefs of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, all members of the Congress, a famous swordman from Afghanistan who's teaching me to eat my words. What you do is you take the S off the beginning of the sword and put it on the end before you swallow it. And who else is coming? Oh yes, my chef interpreter and the governors of every state in the Union, and of course my cat, Mrs. Tabby Pulse. A helicopter awaits all 8 of you outside the factory gates. I myself await your arrival at the White House with the very greatest pleasure and patience. I beg to remain, sir. Most sincerely yours, Lancelot R. Gilliglass, President of the United States. P.S. Could you please bring me a few Wonka Fatima delights? I love them so much, but everybody around here keeps stealing mine out of the drawer in my desk. Don't tell Nanny. Mr. Wonka stopped reading, and in the stillness that followed, Charlie could hear people breathing. He could hear them breathing in and out much faster than usual. And there were other things too. There were so many feelings and passions, and there was so much sudden happiness swirling around in the air, it made his head spin. Grandma Joe was the first to say something. Yippee! He yelled out, and he flew across the room and caught Charlie by the hands, and two of them started dancing away along the bank of the Chocolate River. We're going, Charlie, sang Grandpa Joe. We're going to the White House after all. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket were also dancing and laughing and singing, and Mr. Wonka ran all over the room, proudly showing the president's letter to the Oompa Loompas. After a minute or so, Mr. Wonka clapped his hands for attention. Come along, he called out. We mustn't dilly, we mustn't dally. Come on, Charlie, and you, Sir Grandpa Joe, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket. The helicopter is outside the gates. We can't keep it waiting. He began hustling the four of them through the door. Hey! Screamed Grandma Georgina from the bed. What about us? We were invited too, and don't forget that. Says all 8 of us were invited, cried Grandma Josephine. And that includes me, said Grandpa George. Mr. Wonka turned and looked at them. Of course it includes you, he said, but we can't possibly get that bad into a helicopter. It won't go through the door. You mean if we don't get out of bed, we can't come? Said Grandma Georgina. That's exactly what I mean, said Mr. Wonka. Keep going, Charlie, he whispered, giving Charlie a little nudge. Keep walking toward the door. Suddenly, behind them, there was a great swoosh of blankets and sheets and a ping of bed springs as the 3 old people all exploded out of the bed together. They came sprinting after Mr. Wonka, shouting, Wait for us! Wait for us! It was amazing how fast they were running across the floor of the great chocolate room. Mr. Wonka and Charlie and the others stood staring at them in wonder. They leapt across paths and over little bushes like gazelles in springtime, with their bare legs flashing and nightshirts flying out behind them. Suddenly, Grandma Josephine put the brakes on so hard she skidded 5 yards before coming to a stop. Wait, she screamed. We must be mad. We can't go to a famous party in the White House in our nightshirts. We can't stand there practically naked in front of all those people while the president pins medals all over us. Oh, wailed the Grandma Georgina. Oh, what are we going to do? Don't you have any clothes with you at all? Asked Miss Wonka. Of course we don't, said Grandma Josephine. We haven't been out of bed for 20 years. We can't go, wailed Grandma Georgina. Let's stay behind. Can't we buy something from the store? Said Grandpa George. With what? Said Grandma Josephine. We don't have any money. Money? Cried Miss Wonka. Good gracious me. Don't you go worrying about money. I've got plenty of that. Listen, said Charlie. Why don't we ask the helicopter to land on the roof of a big shop on the way over? Then you can all pop downstairs and buy exactly what you want. Charlie, cried Mr. Wonka, grasping him by the hand. What would we do without you? You're brilliant. Come along, everybody. We're off to stay in the White House. They all linked arms and went dancing out of the chocolate room and along the corridors and out through the front door into the open where the big helicopter were waiting near the factory gates. A group of extremely important-looking gentlemen came forward toward them and bowed. Well, Charlie, said Grandma Joe, it's certainly been a busy day. It's not over yet, said Charlie laughing. Hasn't even begun.